Hello, and thank you for watching. I am the EDC academic, and what I wanted to talk about today is the topic, the question rather, of why carry a large folder. And the reason for this question is in part a response to the popularity of knives in the 3 to 3.25 inch range. And I understand that part of the popularity of those knives is because of certain restrictive knife laws in certain states and certain locales. But I live in the state of Missouri, and we don't have restrictive knife laws here, and there's still this sort of preference in the knife community for knives that are in the 3 to 3.25 inch range, and so it's with that sort of being the prevailing attitude. Now, certainly, if you look at the market. And you look at the popularity of knives such as the Banter, excuse me, and the Elementum. It really shows that that's the direction that the market is going. So I wanted to take a little bit of time just to sort of answer this question of why carry a large folder. Whenever we have so many high quality, inexpensive knives in that 3 to 3.25 inch range, what are some of the benefits of carrying a large folder? And I come up with a list of 5 points, and if you want to add to that, I would be I would love to hear them. But in the interest of sort of keeping this video to a reasonable length, I just wanted to address about 5 of them. And just as a point of comparison, I have here the Kershaw leak, and this is without question one of the most popular folding knives in that aforementioned 3 to 3.25 inch range. This is the modified Wharncliffe version of it. It is a flipper assisted opener. It also has the thumb stud there. And I must say this is not my favorite knife. I really don't understand the popularity of this knife. I mean, it's fine. I'm not knocking it, but I certainly don't understand why this has been so popular for probably about 20 or so years now. But anyway, I'm sort of getting too far off the topic for the video. But this is the size of knife that is sort of dominating the market right now. So I'm just going to put that aside. And on the topic of large folding knives, I have a selection here from my rotation of my EDC rotation. And I'm just going to work my way from left to right here. And on the far left, we have, of course, the Buck 110. And this is the Buck 110 that I've had since 1987. I purchased this knife, I think, for like 25 bucks at Walmart. Uh, I was working as a dishwasher at the local Pizza Hut, making $3.35 an hour. And so the reason I mention that is because this was a full day's wages for me at that time. That's how much I wanted this knife. And I think that in most people's minds, whenever they think of large folders, I think most people would put the Buck 110 in that classification of a large folding knife. And my hands also fall in the range of large. I wear a size large glove. So that means that I have large hands. That's how the sizes work. So whenever I talk about large hands, I'm just referring to the glove size so that people will have an indication of what they're actually looking at whenever the knife is fitting in my hand. So I'm assuming that most people are familiar with the Buck 110. It has a 3 and 3/4 inch long blade, and the knife itself is, I think, just shy, about 8.5 inches there. And I think that for most people, the reason why it falls in the large size isn't just because of the length, but because of the weight. And let me bring up a scale here. We'll sweep some of these knives aside. Have my scale. I don't know if that's going to come across on the camera or not, but we're sitting right at about 7.4 ounces for that knife. And the Buck 110, I I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it because, again, just this knife has been around for so long. It's been so popular for so long. Almost everything that has been, that one is capable of saying about this knife has already been said by others and to better effect than I can do here. But I think this is a great knife. I still have the original sheath for it. This is that you can see it says 110 right there. Stamp. This is well worn, well loved. This is back whenever they were still making the sheaths in the United States. I think they have produced in Mexico now, which is which is fine. They're still high quality sheaths, but there's just something, part of the appeal of buck knives for a lot of people is the association with the United States, and it, to some people, it sort of diminishes it to have the sheath that is being imported. But I do have that original sheath. But back to the knife itself, it is exceedingly comfortable in the hand. And some people object to the weight. I actually like the weight. And so we're getting to the first two of my bulleted points here about why carry a large folder. One, comfort. The size of this handle. The larger the pocket knife, the larger the handle, obviously. And it just makes it more comfortable to hold in your hand. And then the second bullet point I have is confidence. You just feel confident with the larger handle in your hand. It just gives you more purchase. It feels secure. It feels, safe. And that notion of comfort and confidence to the knife is really helpful whenever you are engaged in use of the knife itself. You want a knife that is going to be comfortable. You want a knife that you are confident in holding. And just sort of moving down here to talk about some of these other knives that I have on the table. This is the Swiss Army Ranger Grip. I think this is the 79. I think the difference between the 79 and the 78 is that the 79 has the corkscrew and the 78 has the Phillips. But I could be misremembering that. I could be flipping those numbers. But it's amazing how similar these knives are. When I say these knives, I mean the Buck 110 and the Ranger Grip 78. Just look at the profile there. Look at the almost identical length, both in terms of the length of the handle and the length of the blade. You might not be able to see it here. There's the plunge grind, and then there's the secondary plunge line rather, and then the secondary bevel. You probably won't be able to see the secondary bevel all that well on camera, but the secondary bevel begins right about there, and that's about the same amount of blade length whenever you compare it, secondary bevel beginning right there to the plunge grind that is right there and giving access to the secondary bevel on the Buck. It's about the same, and so that just goes to show the influence of the Buck 110. But to return to this knife, this is one of the knives that in my collection that I sort of refer to as my dog walking knife. And also beyond that, just a general outdoors knife. If I'm walking the dog, this goes in my pocket, usually with the whistle attached to the little ring here. My Labrador, she's whistle trained, and so I usually have her off leash. And then whenever she ventures too far away, I'll just give that little whistle a toot, and Georgia will return to me. But I'm not going to go through all the features of this knife here because that's not the purpose of the video. The purpose of the video is to talk about that main blade and just the general utility of carrying a knife like this, which is the third bullet point that I have. Increased utility, so comfort, confidence. And this knife here, the handle of this knife here is surprisingly comfortable, even with all these other inserted tools there. Whenever your hands on them, they just sort of disappear into the folds of your fingers. You don't really notice them, even when bearing down or engaged in cutting, either forward or backward. So you have comfort, you have the confidence that comes with having a good hand purchase on the handle itself, and increased utility. And the reason I say increased utility There's a common adage in the knife community that a large knife can do everything that a small knife can, but a small knife can't do everything that a large knife can. And that's certainly not true without some provisos. Certainly, in some whittling applications, you'd be far better off with a case peanut than you would be with a buck 110, right? But the general truism of that expression remains. The large knife is capable of doing a lot of fine, delicate work, especially if you kind of get choked up on it. If you choke up on the handle itself, turning it, either way, you can, get a good grip, good purchase on the knife and the object that you're working on, getting it close to the blade. And you can really do a lot of fine work with a larger blade such as that. And moving on here to talk about some of these other knives, I kind of hate to talk about two Victorinox products in a row. So this was the Victorinox Ranger Grip 79 I said earlier, which is technically speaking a Wenger model, but this is after the Wenger had been subsumed by the Victorinox company. So I'll just stick with the Victorinox branding, even though this knife was available before Victorinox took it over. This is the actual Victorinox, and this is the Hunter Pro. Now, one caveat on this. I purchased this knife pre-COVID, uh, and is about half the price that it is now. If you go to Victorinox's website, if you go to Amazon, even this knife is 120 bucks, and this is not a $120 knife. I love this knife. Don't get me wrong; it is not worth $120. There are far better options in the $120 range than you can here. But I got this new from Victorinox for $60. And for $60, this is an excellent knife. They bill it as a two-handed opener, but as you see, with a little bit of breaking the knife in and just general familiarity with the knife, it is certainly a knife that you can one hand open, and this knife just disappears in your hand. It is amazing how comfortable this knife is. And I don't normally like knives that have these sort of pre-established grooves in them because it seems to assume a hand of a certain size. But it for my hand here, it's perfect. And not only is it perfect, it's perfect in a variety of different grips. You can go reverse grip on this. You can go forward grip. You can go the gorilla grip. It's just no matter how you hold on to it, it is so exceedingly comfortable. And Victorinox has also done an excellent job with this pocket clip here. Now, the pocket clip, it is right side bias. The knife itself, being mid-lock back, is both lefty and righty friendly, but in terms of carry, there's only one possible option here, at least from the factory, and that is with this right side pocket clip. And it possesses some subtle contouring here, and that contouring and the slightly rounded edges there, they just allow it to, again, just disappear in your hand. And this knife, I think this knife, let me get my scale back up here, in comparison to the 110, and the 110 was what, 7.8 ounces? 7.48 ounces. This knife by Victorinox is 6.3, and let's compare that to the Swiss Ranger. So 6 ounces. This is just shy of 6 ounces. This is just shy of 6 1/3 ounces. So it's somewhat heavy if you compare it to something like the Leek, which is what, about a 3 ounce knife? Yeah, just over 3 ounces. So the Victorinox Hunter Pro here is heavier, twice as heavy as the Kershaw Leek. But I would argue that, whenever you talk about, ask the question, well, is the knife heavy or not? That is a very subjective subjectively assessed. And different people are going to have different considerations as to what they consider to be a heavy knife. And beyond that, there's also the notion of just what you're used to. If you're used to an ultralight 2-3 ounce knife in your pocket, then yes, 6 ounces is going to feel like a brick. But carry it for a while, I would suggest, and you'll see that what you might have previously regarded as heavy maybe isn't so heavy. And with that being said, let me go back to the Buck 110. There is another version of the 110, the 110 Light. And the 110 Light does, in fact, live up to its name. 110 Light comes in at just shy of 3 ounces, 2.96 ounces by this scale. So it is less than half the weight of the original 110. I must admit, this is not my favorite of the larger knives that I have. This knife here, to get it light, the scales are obviously different. It has the fiberglass reinforced nylon scales that effectively look plastic, effectively feels plastic, and that's really why I don't like this knife. It does not have a premium look and feel to it, but it certainly does possess all of the utility that you would want to come with a large folding blade. And even though they call it the 110, and it certainly is styled like the 110, it is different in a couple of different ways in regard to the blade. You'll see that this is on the Light. They retain the clip point, but it is a straight clip point. It is not the traditional curved clip point that you find on the standard 110. And another difference, and you can probably see it right there, the plunge line. The plunge line on the original Buck, let me get my little pointer here. The plunge line on the original Buck is straight. The plunge line on the Buck Light 110 is at a slight angle there. And I'm not sure why they did that. And I'm not even sure if the modern versions, again, this one's from 1987, maybe the Buck 110 produced in 2024, this is February 2025 as I'm speaking, but maybe the more recently produced 110s also have that sort of angled, that angled plunge line. I don't know. I don't have a new 110. I just have this original one here. Well, not, I mean, original to me. So that is the basis of the comparison between this Buck 110 Light and this Buck 110, which was just the traditional. So let me put some of these knives away here, and I got one more knife to talk about here. And that brings me to the last 2 points that are on my list here. So I've been talking about, answering the question rather, why carry a large folder? And I've talked about comfort, convenience, increased utility. And the last 2 points on my bulleted notes are: one, cleaner/safer for food prep. Now, this might not apply to you. It applies to me. And, this channel is devoted to everyday carrying, which of course I'm talking about my everyday carry and some of the reasons why I'm carrying the things that I carry. You might not do a lot of food prep. I do food prep with mine, not necessarily on a daily basis, but whenever traveling, staying in hotels, Airbnbs, I quite frequently find myself in a position where I am doing food prep. And one of the advantages of doing food prep with a longer knife, not only does it afford the aforementioned comfort, confidence with that larger blade, but the smaller the blade, this leek here would be perfectly fine at doing the cutting that you would typically be doing with food prep. But notice that whenever you're working with the food, you're much closer to the food with the knife. And that just makes it more likely for some food particles to get in the joint and the operational functions of the knife itself. Whereas if you have a longer blade, then those moving parts of the knife, the joints, the places where the handle is, with the liners are coming in contact with the scales, and the scales and the liners are getting in contact with the locking mechanism there and the hinge. All of that can get gummed up whenever you're doing food prep. And so, quite obviously, whenever you have the longer blade, you have the greater distance with what you're working on. And the functional component, what I mean by functional components in this case is the components of the knife that allow it to fold. The less likely it is for you to get food contamination in those joints. And you can always clean your knife, but it's better to just not have it get that dirty in the first place, because on those tolerances are tight, and it isn't always going to be easy to do the cleaning necessary in there in order to keep the blade not only operating functionally, but to prevent cross contamination in the event of future use of food prep. So I've talked about comfort, I've talked about convenience, I've talked about increased utility, cleaner, safer for food prep, and the last thing that I will mention is self-defense. And it's one of those unfortunate realities that you might at a certain point find yourself in a situation where you need to defend yourself or those around you. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of people carry knives. It's not one of the reasons I do, but I'm certainly understanding of those that choose to carry a knife as a self-defense option. And I think that the knives that are built for that application, and I recognize there's some degree of irony in what I'm about to say because I'm holding the Spyderco Military 2, but knives that are purpose-built for tactical, a lot of them are blacked out. And I think that's kind of silly. Unless you're actually in a combat situation, in a covert op, where you're getting ready to assassinate somebody with a blade, I don't see any purpose in getting it all blacked out. Now, of course, some of the coating there is for corrosion resistance, but that doesn't apply to this particular knife. This is one of the Crucible's particle metallurgy. This is the S110V. But another reason why I don't like the coating and all the blacked out knives is because whenever you're talking about self-defense, you want to avoid getting in the physical altercation in the first place. That's ideal. And there's a psychological component to self-defense. Just brandishing a knife if you are threatened. Oftentimes, that in and of itself will be enough to get out of that dangerous situation. Those, the people that are going to be threatening you with violence, they are wanting to avoid violence inflicted upon themselves. They're looking for easier targets. And oftentimes, if you can just, with the display of a knife, just to let the other person know, that person who is thinking about attacking you or is posing a physical threat to you, just, the awareness that you are not going to be an easy target and that they could potentially get injured themselves. Oftentimes that could prevent a situation from happening before you actually need to physically defend yourself. And so never underestimate that psychological component. And the fact is that whenever you're talking about the psychological component of what is going to look more intimidating, this one you could hold it in your hand and it might not even be noticed by the assailant or the potential assailant under a certain set of lighting conditions. This one is going to be noticeable, right? And so in that kind of situation, you want the person to know that you are capable of protecting yourself. Again, you are not, in the situation I'm describing here, you are not on a covert op. You are not trying to assassinate somebody quietly and undetected. You want the other person to know that you have this weapon that could be used to inflict danger upon the person who is doing the attacking. And in that situation, you want the other person to know about that. And so that's why I like the larger blades. I like the ones that are not coated. You want them to be reflective in this situation so that it makes it more noticeable. If they don't notice that you have a knife, if they don't notice that you are capable of protecting yourself, then you're not going to have a deterrent effect. And at that point, your only option is going to be to deploy the knife in a defensive way rather than avoiding that situation altogether. And it's always better just to avoid that situation altogether. So I think I have now covered my 5 points: comfort, confidence, increased utility, cleaner, safer for food prep, and also good for self-defense. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in a future video.